We all are gonna die sometime. I don't know how many of us are ever ready for it.
Early January is sweater weather in Palo Alto, California. And the busiest time of year for Ellen Clore, a children's librarian and mother.
I had gone to work in the morning. My daughter was in 7th grade then, and so I picked her up in the afternoon from school and brought her home. And that night, we had arranged to have a knitting group meeting.
Ellen is passionate about baking, quilting, and most of all, knitting.
I had taught a number of my friends how to knit, and we'd started to get together about once a month. I packed up all my stuff. I kind of carry a lot of stuff, it seems like, wherever I go. I had a big bag full of knitting books. I had my own knitting, and then I also had a paper bag that had my friends' knitting in it. So I took everything out to my car, got in my car, drove to my friend's house.
Usually, Ellen looks forward to the weekly Monday Stitch Fest, but today, she has other things on her mind.
I almost didn't go because I had an event at my daughter's school later in the week, but I also felt responsible to my friends. Got out of the car, loaded myself up. I had the books and my knitting, and then I was carrying the paper bag with my friend's knitting.
Oh my God, oh, I am so sorry. I am so sorry.
My friend had 2 steps in front of her house. I was wearing clogs. Everything sort of went flying. I tripped on the first step, and the way I fell was flat on my chest on the upper step, and I think my knees fell on the lower step. So I got up and I sort of recovered myself, checked myself out. Actually, my knees were sort of scraped and they were more uncomfortable than anything else. But I did notice that I had a pain in my chest every time I took a breath. But it wasn't excruciating. There was no blood.
Too many knots in there.
You're right. I'm new to this.
Oh, someone's at the door. But you're doing well.
Hi,
Judy.
how are you?
Oh, Ellen, I can't wait to learn that cable stitch that you do so well.
I put my things down.
Ellen? Are you okay?
I tripped on these silly shoes. I took a spill right on the porch. Something.
As Ellen brushes herself off, her hand grazes something sharp.
Something is sticking me here.
Then I lifted up my sweater and I looked down.
Oh my God! Does it hurt?
Feel anything? Oh my God. That's a size 14 needle.
Sticking out of my bra is the broken end of a knitting needle, and I really did not quite know what to think.
The jagged end of the wooden knitting needle protrudes from Ellen's chest.
The little paper bag I was carrying with all of the yarn and the needles in it had fallen on the ground, and then I had fallen with my chest on top of it.
She has no idea how deep the needles lodged.
I sat down on the sofa.
Should we pull it out?
No, don't pull it out. We need to call 911.
Judy, call 911.
No one really knew what to do. I mean, it was like the weirdest and most unusual situation. I wasn't in excruciating pain. There was no blood. So I didn't really understand at that point how serious what had happened to me was. I sort of went into shock after that. My friends were gathered around me, sort of trying to keep me calm.
Ellen? Ellen?
Honey, come
Ellen is taken to a nearby hospital. Dr. Swaminatha Mahadevan and the rest of the surgical team are surprised to find Ellen conscious and alert.
All right, Ellen. I want you to be very, very still so that the needle doesn't move.
The way she was acting and the way that her vital signs were normal, the initial suggestion potentially was that it wasn't that deep. Maybe it was just stuck in her sternum into the bone and hadn't gone deeper than that.
But Dr. Mahadevan soon discovers that the situation is far worse than he imagined.
A CT scan revealed, surprisingly, that the needle had entered into her heart. It had penetrated her right ventricle, which is one of the muscular parts of your heart, and that it was lodged there. And that set in motion a series of events to get her to the operating room as soon as possible to get it out.
If the needle becomes dislodged, Ellen could die within minutes.
If there was bleeding around her heart, that could potentially prevent her heart from expanding and contracting and providing blood to the rest of her body, including her brain. Having that blood around your heart, even a small amount, could be lethal. It could happen in seconds to minutes.
Right now, the only thing keeping Ellen alive is the needle itself.
If somebody had removed that knitting needle, she could have died from it, even before reaching the emergency department.
They told me that they were going to have to crack my chest and remove the needle from my heart. That was the point at which I did start to get frightened. Even I understood that a needle in your heart could kill you.
Coming up.
You pull the needle out, and now you get a gush of blood.
And later.
I remember going into third year, having fun. Last thing I remember.
That's a size 14 needle. Oh my God.
Children's librarian Ellen Clore has just learned that the wooden knitting needle impaled in her chest has pierced her heart. Removing it could be riskier than the accident itself.
Opening your chest and operating on your heart is obviously very, very risky, and so this was a very complicated surgery.
To save Ellen, doctors must remove the needle quickly but carefully.
Anytime you're taking a sharp object out of a very delicate structure like your heart, it can cause more damage. So it had to be done very gently, very carefully, make sure that you don't lose a lot of blood, and that can be very tricky. You pull the needle out, and now you get a gush of blood.
Removing the needle is only the first step. The hole must be sewn up as quickly as possible.
They removed the needle between heartbeats and then put a stitch in between the next heartbeat, that they had to wait for when my heart wasn't pumping to do those parts of the procedure.
The risky surgery takes only 30 minutes. Hours later, Ellen wakes up.
I looked around and I saw my husband and my mother and my sister all there, and I felt incredibly relieved that I was there, I could see them, and I was still alive.
3 days after the surgery, it's safe for Ellen to leave the hospital and recover at home.
I realized how fortunate I was that the needle broke. If it had been a metal knitting needle, it would have just sliced all the way through my heart, I'm sure. I mean, it would have been like an arrow going through my heart and going out my back.
But Ellen's ordeal isn't over.
About 10 days after the accident, I woke up with intense pain in my back. This pain was just excruciating. It was like much worse than the pain I'd had when the needle had been in my chest.
I'm calling about my wife. She's in a lot of pain.
And we called over to Stanford and they told my husband to bring me in. They did a whole battery of tests, chest x-rays and a CT scan, and it seemed like everything was okay. 2 days later, I got a phone call from a radiologist at Stanford who had been looking at my CT scans.
Yes?
They were concerned because they saw a mass that could be an enlarged lymph node on my right side.
Ellen is a breast cancer survivor who has been in remission since 1994. But the cancer has returned.
I, of course, was terrified about what the future might hold, but on the other hand, I was happy to have it diagnosed because you feel like you're doing something about it. I had a mastectomy. As soon as that healed, I had 12 rounds of chemotherapy, and then I had 6 weeks of radiation.
In October 2006, only 9 months after the accident and cancer diagnosis, Ellen gets some incredible news. Her body is cancer-free.
My oncologist always says the knitting needle really saved my life because the cancer I had was so aggressive that if it had gone on undetected for just a few months more, I would have probably not lived. Here's the actual needle. It does give me sort of the creeps to look at it. It has my dried blood on it. Even holding this needle here makes me a little nervous, so I'm happy to put it down as soon as possible. People are often very surprised that I've continued to knit. But, you know, the knitting really didn't have anything to do with it at all. Just me being a klutz. You know, it's so weird to have this horrible thing happen to you and then have it be a blessing in disguise.